Chewa tangpo di kasa laso Tonglam kapsu Tonglam kapsu kari rea langa tak chesong.
The 방자 nyumba ba rimga gudi shagi yo mares di karacheneres.
Ale laso. Re ane komlam la rimba mindawa che dang Tonglam mindawa che kar Tonglam la che mego ba dang komlam la che kubi jumzen kari rea song yo ra la. Da Tonglam kapsu kamsum di Tongman korang di ngogal di kirpe sakwa di sanamido nyumma denzo sebo go yore. Ani di nyumma sebo di sana ani kamsum di sakbi ngoga di zo shewa di Tongman di ngor kirpa di kari chag yore sana tenpa shi nelu di chag yore. Tenpa shi nelu di to kogo yore di ngogal di kirpa pangja di mang kogo yore wa. Di pangja di ani nga zo kunde chu denzo nyumma chu denzo le doa. Nyumma chu dani 동al 본종 거바 람 소소소소라 주다 계단 뛴다 메다오 메다네 차제 디방 고부유디 아니 다랑게 코랑게 먹을 방자 탐지 펑투부 여래라 투도 여래 대만내로도 똑도부 여래 아니 다 건망갑수 된저 대섬진 두투부 여 말에 가서 동 건망 건남디 다 통남디 춘이 되면 통선바데 야르게 다야와 통선바데 무트네 균장에다 야르게 다야래 가르치는 야르게 단 고고 여래서리고 방자 군덕게 자산하면도 데스방에 렐라 제된저데 상망망 사와래 다 타우 방에 갈래 가고 용건된서 응거 방고고 해 거방다 아니 사람바 저디 건 낭라야 되네 사람바 야야야 저 용도잖아 렐라라라 된저다 때 시체체 된저 건 방 데스 칼레카 된저 중국도 제제제 방이 아니 거래만면도 고샤송래 동남도 된데 면도와 고된데 야야 면도와 그런 방제히 다른 예와잖아 망보다 요래데 나 희마도 봐 가서 동물군요 거바 람 제베 방제 희마도 많이 고된데 예와 제 메고바디 김진도 스토제 차버래
So we had a couple of questions from yesterday, and the first one was, why do we present the 9 stages or the 9 intensities of the afflictive emotions, of the defilements or objects to be abandoned, the discards, on the path of cultivation, but why do we not divide the disturbing emotions in the same way on the path of seeing in terms of the discards? And the reason that is given for that difference, that we do present the 9 types of each of the discards on the path of cultivation and not on the path of seeing, is the following. When we talk about the path of seeing, then this is speaking generally about the path of seeing that is reached from each of the 3 realms. And in any case, the direct opposing factor to the realization of the path of seeing needs to be abandoned. So when we speak about the discards of the path of seeing, then these discards are that which directly prevent the realization that constitutes the path of seeing. And those need to get abandoned. Now, mainly the path of seeing can be looked at in terms of directly seeing the meaning of the Four Noble Truths. So this is what needs to be realized, right? The four truths need to be realized. And so they have their own particular things, their own obstructive aspects that prevent the direct realization of the Four Noble Truths. So the direct opposing factor to the realization of each of the Four Noble Truths is that which needs to be abandoned in order to directly realize those truths. And that has aspects within the 10 afflictive emotions, the root afflictive emotions, as we have seen. So here, it's really that which opposes the realization of the truth, of the nature phenomena, and so on, directly, that needs to be abandoned in light of the Four Noble Truths. On the path of cultivation, though, this insight, this realization has already happened, right? Now, the things that need to be abandoned in order to realize the Four Noble Truths, or in order to realize the nature of reality, does not need to be abandoned anymore. That's already gone. What is left now are different disturbing emotions that are still present. So it's more subtle what happens here. And those need to be abandoned gradually. So while the more easy, more obvious obstacles, the more obvious discards, the more easily abandoned discards, the imputed obscurations, they have already been abandoned. Now we're actually concerned with more difficult discards, because they're more subtle and they need to be actually worked on gradually over the course of the path of cultivation. And so it starts out with the more coarse disturbing emotions, the bigger ones, and they're easier to be abandoned. And then one moves on to more and more subtle aspects of these discards, or these disturbing emotions that are harder and harder to be gotten rid of. So that's why it is explained in this way. Like, the path of seeing has these opposing factors, these direct oppositions to the realization of the Four Noble Truths. So that's all that needs to be abandoned there. But then on the path of cultivation, it's to really break down in a gradual manner these other discards. And because it's this gradual elimination of those discards, we need to present it in this more detailed way, looking at the discards in terms of the 9 stages, or 9 levels each.
네, 맞아. 이 저거 셴바진에 선만당 와이나 돈은 예시에 두주 동동으로 그 냠적이 윤지 넣으실라. 냠적 윤지기 내가 그래. 냠적이 윤지 인도잖아는 그 대ring달라 깨지들라 빼줘보러 와. 네, 주도직이라도 나 주전이라도 다 양나 가서 그래. 주도시로지. 양나 천강도지. 양나 인가 된데 두주지 마도 봐. 근데 두주는 것이라 요 말해. 되네 저러는 냠차 예시 윤되네 절라. 아니 동al kunjogo wallam tenso ni ngogal to gyurbe ani pangja de lo pangto go yore ani komlam de ta kansa re se sona tenden yo mare de chi do na samno na juzuru mo shadare ro ko nyama chi ni ji ge ja mare ko lo ne lo dawan dawa khashi mitse khashi kalba ro ene ta ka sore nyarang ge to da sore di shirja che ba ina ni ta 통남 메시 디 가께와 통남 톰네 송데 되네 다시마 도변하는 가재께와 숨 가재께와 든 가재다 된데 가재께와 dunzum 유사지 와 되네 나가 망보지래 비요래 다 역다나 깨와 숨도지 세째와 숨도 세숨 거고와 근데 뒤서도스 정보로지 차게 되는 거를 매일매일 놓고선 하는 거고든죠 네 힘사로 서로 놓고요래 방 디르메르마 조에다 방자네 방야칼라 카보여 봐도 그 칼레 찍지니도 지는 로고선 에네데 차버네스.
From another perspective, we can also say that the reason why this is presented in this way is the time span that we actually need to consider for the path of seeing and the path of cultivation. So the path of seeing is actually a very short duration. It's one moment of a moment of a completion of an action in terms of one session of meditative absorption. So it's one meditative absorption that is described here. That might take some time. It might be a meditative absorption that takes an hour or 2 hours, 4 hours, maybe an entire night, maybe a day and a night, but not more than that. So the path of seeing, which is described with the moment of one complete meditative absorption, is, when we look at the greater scheme of things, actually a very short time. And so therefore we don't need to break down the afflictive emotions or the discards that are being abandoned there in so much detail. In comparison to that, if we look at the path of cultivation, this actually describes a much longer time frame. We can't really for sure say it for how long it takes for an individual being, but overall, generally, it takes a long time. It might take months, years, lifetimes, even complete kalpas, like many kalpas, to complete the path of cultivation. If we look at the presentation of the Shravakas in particular, of the Shravakayana, then the time span that is given from the achievement of the path of seeing until perfect, like complete arhatship is attained, so until the Shravaka arhatship is attained, might take 3, 7, or 21 lifetimes. So for an individual, depending on the circumstances, it might be a little bit faster or a little bit slower. But overall, it takes a long time. And the long time that is necessary to traverse the path of cultivation is because each of the afflictive emotions and each of the levels of the afflictive emotions need to be addressed individually. Every problem, like every discard, needs to be treated with the antidote specifically. And so therefore, because it's such a long time, we actually also in the presentation look at it in more detail. Like we split it up into more sections because it is such a gradual, in some cases very slow, very detailed progression that is undergone there.
No nimasha mashaji negabde tuzu shadro yubi sharbi tuzu tongdong roa. Kan dii ni tongna mishi tong ma tongdi dan negab rojire. Tong zinne ni nyingkang nimashare ni tuzu rinpo yore. Ani kora indi komlam de rembe yeshe kerim. Ani pangcha denzo pong rinpo dine do yundu yeshe ya rinpa mangbo drogo gore la pangcha tawa yang mangbo je pangko gore. Ani tuzu koya yin jabar de yang korko da naga mangbo de tuzu chabare yazo.
If we give an example for this, when we consider the rising of the sun, then just the time of the sun being about to rise, being about to appear, and the sunrise itself, that's actually a very short time, right? This like appearance of the sun itself. But then when the sun traverses the entire sky throughout the day, that is a much longer time span. So to follow that, then we can distinguish much more detail, like many different phases. So in the same way, also the path of seeing is like the just rising of the sun compared to then the observance of the gradual progression of getting rid of all these different discards on the path of cultivation.
Also, tenen also, dewa nyeba de teba chechungi 개발을 하나.
동남디 개발.
동남지 개발라서. 나 대과 최종 동남 zamata theba shimbo ni lam nga sama kebar yore cholam jolam tonam kono melo balam nga ja ta hi komme nyamlen di ten daw re de ina te tes men daw de tambo na theba shimbo ko semje gi chokha ga ji le byong ro wa en parjin do ni nyamlen chokha ga ji le byong ro wa yen chama nya war sha ba she yang da ba pong she se gan de do de ji bo ji yang re zuru gang ba she la so ba chang ju ju che sum ju so de nyamlen che le kebar men do de 대보 전부 탑 대즈면로 하가 가셨나 닝자나 장바단 된소 믹스 해쳐서로 버전 주도 좀 믹스 해쳐와 소남지 소들 믹스 너가 쇼쳐와 제 용도 는 돈은 미제 도빈도잖아요 꼭 하가 자송이 자도 그래 다 디지부야 말다 소남지 소지부 말 예시게 소라양 이렇게 버춤 잘해 샤랍 당면도 배 샤랍 당본네 야랑기 값서 강서게 다음에 봐. 네. 조자든 제 내년에 나로와. 한 태고 전부터 강서게 다음에 다 주의 다음에 네가 나냠전에 자든지는 누구 요래. 아니 따와야 당번에 개발체 공부하다 줘봐 상마 개발 용도 중이 통 용도 값라야. 네가 다 동니 예시 똑마도 쓰는데 동니 똑바 삼절은 나오더래. 그래도 동니 남 당번에 동니 뭐든 제단다 돈이다 남제단 개발처인데 니랑게 강사게 당미비 돈이 잠지 도도 그래. 저기 다음에 중세도 더 그러와. 태고 전부이 네 다음에 니자 세고로 강사 다음에다 저기 다음에 강다 초탐제 돈이디 무슨도 도도 그래. 전 돈은 미세 그런 예세 그런 초탐지 돈이도 베이제 임바다 강사 다음에 또베 예세 임바니라 개발 차소아. 디인데 방자양 아니 태고 년랑게 태고 동남도변도 녀모베 제바 예군다 기차 방도그래 마도 세제 제베 군다 기차디 아니 야고전 방도고요 말에 아니 택진기 동남 예시 귤라게 인도 녀모버테바다 세제 제바 니자이 군다 기차 니 상마방도고요래 어데네스 개발 교육이래니 대스면로 차서나
년대게 군다
뇽몽버 제바 지부 방도 그래 뇽몽버 제바 지부 마세 대군다다 현재니디 군다기차 영조 방도 그래 한 태고 친구 저기 군다 대방도 말해 저기 당매기 저기가 세제 집어서 그래 세제 집어도 군다기차 년도기 집어서 방도 말해 테스트에서 세그로와 이나 군다기차 방어 저거 말해 방 매버 차도 말해 하여래 태고 친구 이 돈음 예셔도 병도 강서 가서 녀모버 집어도 세제 집어 니게 군다기차 잠매도 그래 방자나 개버려래 도자라인 개버도 알아
So the second question then was with regard to the difference between the path of seeing, the realization of the path of seeing between the Mahayana and the Shravakayana. What is the difference there of the realization and what the path of seeing constitutes? Actually, this applies for all of the 5 paths, the differences to all of the 5 paths, because there are differences in the basis to achieving those paths, in the practice, in the methods and accumulation of merit and so forth. Actually, a lot of things are similar. A lot of practices are similar, but some are specific to the Mahayana, like giving rise to bodhicitta, the practice of the 6 parameters, and the emphasis on compassion and loving kindness, and the strong emphasis of using skillful method to accumulate merit, and then, of course, the development of wisdom, the discussion of the accumulation of wisdom, which we come back to. But there are others that are very similar, like the 4 applications of mindfulness, the 4 authentic abandonments, and the different aspects to like the factors of enlightenment and so forth. Like many aspects are actually similar between the 2 traditions or the 2 vehicles. So the Mahayana, though, has some. There are many practices and points where they are common, but there are also some that are actually different. And based on those differences, the presentation of the 5 paths is identified differently, or they progress the 5 paths very differently. So, for specifically, the strong emphasis of the Mahayana of the accumulation of merit and wisdom needs to be considered in this in this light. When we talk about the accumulation of wisdom, we speak about selflessness, and for the Shravakayana, that addresses only the selflessness of person, while in the Mahayana it addresses similarly the 2 types of selflessness. So the selflessness of person and the selflessness of phenomena. And so that shows us that there are actually severe differences in the view, meditation, and conduct that ensue from that difference between the 2 yanas. And so when the path of seeing is identified as seeing reality, as realizing emptiness, this emptiness refers for the Shravakayana as to the realization of selflessness of person only. So they partially, like compared to the Mahayana, it's only a partial identification of emptiness, while for the Mahayana, both types of selflessness need to be realized, so the emptiness of all phenomena, and the selflessness of person and phenomena, is the realization of emptiness that is identified as the path of seeing in the Mahayana. And accordingly, then also the discards are different, right? Because the realization is identified differently, then also the discards are different. And so when we speak about the 2 obscurations, for example, the 2 obscurations are the afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations. The Shravakas, when entering the path of seeing, or when achieving the path of seeing, and they are able to eliminate the afflictive, the imputed aspect of the afflictive emotions, as well as actually only a little bit, a tiny aspect of the cognitive obscurations, but we can't say that they have abandoned the imputed afflictive obscurations, because they're not complete, like these are not abandoned, these are not completely gone. So there are still some left, so we can't speak about them having been gotten rid of. And of course, the co-emergent obscurations then also still need to be abandoned later on. So for the Shravakas, it's only the imputed aspect of the afflictive obscurations that is being really abandoned, really gotten rid of at the time of the path of seeing, while from the for a Mahayana practitioner identifying the path of seeing as the realization of emptiness, then the imputed aspects of both the afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations are all abandoned. So these are completely gone by that time. These are the discards. These are just the summary of what is being abandoned, the discards of the path of seeing in light of the obscurations. So let's recite the Manjushri prayer now.
Namadang Gombo Jemsun Jambe Yangla Jazab Ange Lodru Jemye Jendro Yeda Namda Ravzal Chenye Dungun Cheshe Zejir Nide toga le bombs Kandaze Tera mare Mundon donga Jezerovi Rozo gola boje darze Yela choju yadezu Chodar jero nyomo nyelo Lege jaro ronzej Mare munzel donga nyogo Chinye jozeradena Lene daje zaju tarzu Yenden le zo jaze do Chodra jodan joni jendre Tale munze jam Yala de marambadana de Om Arabadhanandi Zeden Jeje Jeravuzere Talu de Mumbarabzali Kada Denju Jolo Dobai Lodru Bombe Nawa Zadozo Anze Dawar Deba Chonse Jewar Denaya Kombo Jamyan Denyin Keme Baryan Donwar Shu la so tene samba cha cha wa chang ju sam ji ko long ge sal dam le ne sambar shu ta kong je sambar ja wa chue je re ban ni je mo me par mo je sung be ken ju gi shung re tan de la ne ju dum she so zo yang da re ba shi de ne yo bi na ne ju na ne je ba ten ba re ten ba na ne ga shi kong du shu jum ne kana ma zo da kun jum gi den ba re ba na ne la de yo re ne kazam gi chue de na ga na ma shu gi
Please listen to the teachings having given rise to the vast motivation of bodhicitta. The text that we're studying in this class is The Gateway to Knowledge by Mipam Rinpoche, And it is outlined by 3 main topics, which are the 10 topics of expertise, the 4 seals of Dharma, and the 4 right discriminations. And within the 10 topics of expertise, we're currently discussing the 8th one, the topic of the truth. And in that discussion, we find a discussion of the 4 noble truths, out of which we are currently discussing the truth of origin. And we have already covered a number of topics within that section, and will now continue from where we have left off yesterday.
감좀이 방자 사람도 동공이 방자들이 시행바인데 나 델라드네 뭔가 군주일로 남조일로 이행의 의미나네 아주다나 군주일로리 네 시행바인 바로와 다 군주일로 델라 동몽갑조 네 덴바시델라 민도면의 책임에 승부여와 지부지장 인사 동몽 한 지부지장 가르스 레람나다 다왕아도 담맹아지 명모부 주용유래 아니 동알라양 다나지 주인 군중라야 다나지 주인 뭐바다람 가리나 참모 주자 연구유마도 많이 민도면의 현재매 선다 가성되네로 송망서와 그 김전대 다로 모두리 쇼기.
So we're currently discussing the topic of the discards on the path of seeing and the path of cultivation. And we said that there are 2 different explanations of this. The explanation according to the Abhidhamma Kosha and the explanation according to the Abhidhamma Samuccaya. And we have reached the Samuccaya one. And so when looking at the discards on the path of seeing, the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, as we have seen, does not differentiate between the different paths, the different truths. So according to the Samuccaya, each of the noble truths is similar in the fact that there are discards that are related to the 5 views and 5 non-views, so 10 discards. In the Kosha we had like differences in number for the different when seeing the different truths, but according to the Abhidhamma Samuccaya that is not the case, but each of the truths has 10. So there are 10 discards when that are being abandoned when seeing the truth of suffering, there are 10 when seeing the truth of origin, there are 10 when seeing the truth of cessation, and 10 when seeing the truth of the path. And now we still need to talk about the reason why this is presented in this way.
나만 군주기로 나 그저 현용의 희대다라 다도 다와나 다치도 다와나 나주기 규민비 남라 초진 예배 소소 덴바 통외 대다 봉월라 케메바 봉월 제발라 케 메브라 헤데 돈라 대신 이노 소나도 제도다 희대다 세도 동al 군중 고바 남제베 네 최된조래 어딘조라 다도 다 그래 송도여와 동al라 다도 다이데 나조 레라오라 봉보 단다 좀신비 나조 봉보들라 네 봉보 선가조 송도여래 아니 네 나다 매즈 봉보데 딱치도 다그러와 산이 나니 신이 로당 다워버도야 텐스 그래 아니 봉보데 가서를 시선은 윤첸 도그래 라서 버제 다와야 용거를 양나 딱지게 다와데 봉보데 뭐데는 파이 남바인다 루이 남바인다 된대지 라루지 남바 디모라 아니 딱바래 템바도나 아니 생각지라서 뭐 때문에 냠바지 쳐버다와 되네지니 사지 동알 남바 되네지 송용무도 와 아니 다우르기 규민빌람라 초진에 파스트잖아 다우르다 가서 봉보디에 칼레 잡아이나 아니 타르바토브레 세겐데로 와 제단 타르바토바디디 상마지 생긴 송구여래 이나양 아니 가르서 그래 다진여바 시르자체네 다음에 또 비셔럽 주고네 남두바이나 다 타르바토브로 와 다진여바 시르자 다음에 또 비셔럽다 탈위는 임발라 아니 딘조지 칼레모보 잡 뭐 좀 냠낸 자서는 다 달바 토브레 생각되는데 디 공부 디랑기 저 갈라잖아 공부 토브레 되는 되는 일로 주 용으로 와. 디 가르쳐도 그래. 다 동알기 템바서로 와. 동알기 라신데나 미네. 아니 다 zemba ji tawa ta tsulum tu ju shozang sa gora de le myong do wa wa di indu ta sumji go ka so gora punjung dan den zo khaji dongal khaji la ye me ka ji xia yo ro ta di ye ga re punjung la ta na xin zi cho gore lam dang go ba la yang de na xin ji le zi cho go ro ta lam dang go ba ni de de lo ga yu di yang na cha la shu ge
Det der kunjung la jibo ti
kunjung da kunjung yang zi ge ta yang cha la ne shu go la.
That's right. So, in our text, paragraph 1086, page 134, in the middle it reads, "This is because their very basis subsists as the belief in a self and the belief in permanence and or interruption and holding as paramount, a path which is neither a cause for purification nor for liberation. Thus, when the truth pertaining to each of these is seen, it is held that these are relinquished without any variation." That is also how it is in actual fact. So, the reason why the Abhidhamma Samuccaya presents that each of the four truths equally has 10 discards to it. So when it's seeing 10 things are being abandoned, is as follows. When we look at these, specifically at the 3 discards that are questionable or that are changing, like they are not present in the other truths in the Abhidhamma Kosha, here now we look at the view of the transitory collections and so on, right? So all of these are based on the grasping to a self, or they're connected to grasping of a self. If one has the view of the self, then these will occur. And so this is easily observable, or is easily understandable with the truth of suffering, because they are the 5 aggregates, and one identifies with the 5 aggregates. One thinks these are my aggregates. There's the idea of the self very strongly based on the 5 aggregates, so the grasping to the transitory collections as the self. And because that is the basis, this kind of view or belief is the basis, then it's also the case that one starts analyzing other things, like the existence of that self in yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so then this leads to extreme views of permanence or interruption. So to eternalistic or nihilistic views, meaning to grasp to the self to be present on the basis of the 5 aggregates continuously, without interruption, without change, or to think that there are no previous and next lives at all. So those are the eternalistic and nihilistic views that are based on the grasping to yourself in the first place. And then, based on that grasping to a self too, there are people who think that by inflicting a lot of hardship on their own bodies or on their own on the aggregates, they will attain liberation. Now, this is still based on a grasping to the self, while liberation is of course attainable. It's not attainable while basing the practice, basing the the path that one follows on a grasping to self. So taking the grasping to a self as the basis, and on the basis of then inflicting a lot of hardship on the body, for example, as discipline or ritual, and thinking that that is paramount, that is the most useful. That then is what is being abandoned, and so we can see how this very clearly plays out with the truth of suffering. It's very easily to identify how these three discards in question are present as opposing factors to the path of to the truth of to the truth of suffering, and it equally applies to the other truths as well. Specifically also the truth of origin, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path need to be looked at in a little bit of different light, but very much in the same light as with the truth of suffering. Also, it also applies to the truth of origin.
그래서 다 조치내서 나타나 단다 동al dilda 네 휴메고 봐 도지야래 그래서는 동al tel라 나바 주제 여긴데 뭔가 저당 군니가 라냠래도 와 다 개발체에서 소디 군중한테 비례 다 군중라 되네 뭔가 가서 그래 조지로라이나 돈마도 매 손샤로 다 가래가래 빼 매바 소리에서 되잖아 다다 아니 딱지도 다와 아니 주름들이 조선세월에 된조숨도 마비하게요 봐 뭔가 군두기로라 가서 뭔가 저기로라 된좀 여 말해서 그래 레데 아니 당원 군두기로라 선다나 대야 여래서 그래 아니 여래 랍되잖아 다 군중세도 레다 녀모 만니라 무슨 제고고 여러와 그 녀모바다 아니 디기 아니 자와 레서로와 와 딘존이라라래 되어서 그래 다 레다 녀몽보 딘존라 가서 다도 다와 간대 연구는 연한 삼성도 주는 거래 그냥 가서 서로와 다 서로와 대두지라 셴바질레 연구래 서로 대화 동안 단님라서 발라 셴바질레 연구도와 디 셴바들레 착바 기기를디 내 서로와다 내 대화 내 동안 진나바지 셴 연구도와 대도 단님 서로데 네가다 나이리 짐베지 로제 레크도와 디디는 대당 아니 소소지 자와지 제벽하고 내 제인 제법은 나이냐 뭐지 로제 레크도와 제도 다도 나와요 상대래 띵어마 제교당 뭔가 제긴 디 제법은 나이냐 뭐지 로레그와 디 제와 제는 나래다 띵어마 나 공도 된잖아래 단다양아 뮤트네 공도 남게 미디 나랑 미디랑아 ngo마야 공도랑 단다랑게 제마양아 공도 남게 그래서 나콜라 가기미도 세로와 야구시기는 다가낭신 난고마야 콜라 야구시기요 단다 야구시기도 마오마 야구시 그래서 공간이 빼면서 참고요 네 저거 인선 네 정모인 네 파마인 네 년예고 인든 가서 들어지 레기도 와 티인도 나서는 가다 나일 좀 당 여바자마세 딱 버진 바이 로지안 랩서와 딱 어느 체버진 로 칸델 레기도는 체버진마다 개왕아지 책임아지 라소바 여마르데 매바 차워서는 나다 나이기 가서 그래 레다 녀몽선하면도 하는 가사당 맹가선하면도 자와 체미져서만 균자로 그래서 삶으로 와서 전에 제자들 로양 레고도 와서 그래 아니 레다 녀몽 다랑라 레다 녀몽 된조랑라 아니 자와 제 용도 아니 다르바 담진님 딱 가서 그래 다르바담지기면 고방 톱스는 단위 배준당 쪽으로 와 돈도 내가 녀몽발로 되는 다르바담지기면 고방 톱 유지 여유다 요 말에대 이나 망보지 않니 가서 그래 샘진 속제 딩저지 탁 줘봐 불소나 하는 다르바톱 그래 서로와 망보지 때는 제동당 가와당 오버들 현자 착받은 수 계속는데 지든지 양도배 따와라 양도배 자와라 된수 술신도 자와셔서나 아니 거 겨와래 나 다르바 토버려서 근데 영으로 와. 다 여러서 여러 디도 군중라양 아니 통화방자들의 여서 디도 단념 로초고 여 어다 군중라 삼노도는 도스 여서 디 대바친 거기다 로로 삼노도는 도스레스.
So here we really need to consider the difference between the Abhidhamma Kosha and the Abhidhamma Samuccaya. And there was no difference, and there's no difference in the truth of suffering. Both the Kosha and the Samuccaya say that there are 10 discards to the truth of suffering. It's where the difference really lies in how the truth of origin is being presented, and the discards when seeing the truth of origin. The Abhidhamma Kosha said there are only 7 discards when seeing the truth of origin. 3, the view of the transitory collections, the extreme views, and holding discipline and ritual as paramount. Those 3 were said to not apply to the truth of origin. But the Abhidhamma Samuccaya does not exclude them. They say that all 10 discards, the 5 views and 5 non-views, apply to the truth of origin too. And how is that? So the truth of origin is described as karma and afflictive emotions, right? And so afflictive emotions are the cause, and karma are the karmic actions that follow the cause of the afflictive emotions. And so how do then specifically the 3 discards that are excluded in the kosha apply to the truth of origin according to the Samuccaya? First of all, the view of the self, the view of the transitory collections. How does that apply to the truth of origin? When a certain experience is experienced, so when a certain sensation, feeling is experienced, then afflictive emotions will arise based on that, right? So there's pleasurable, painful, and neutral sensation. And based on that, then certain afflictions arise, like attachment or aversion and so on. And actually what happens is that one will identify with it as my happiness, as my suffering. So there is a grasping to an I and a mine in the experience of the different sensations, and there when that then leads to the attachment to what is experienced as pleasurable, and aversion to that which is painful, and so on. And then also in the next step, when based on the afflictive emotion that arose based on the sensation, so when the afflictive emotions, we think, okay, this is my anger, this is my attachment to that sensation. Then also when one acts upon that disturbing emotion, we also think, I do this, like this is my action, this is my thing that I'm doing, right? This is what I'm doing. And so actually the grasping to a self is present in relationship to the truth of origin, in light of the grasping to a self as the one that has the afflictive emotions and the one that acts upon them. And so the grasping to a self is there. Then if we look at the extreme views, eternalistic and nihilistic views, those also are present at that time, because we can look at karma and afflictive emotions and develop those extreme views by analyzing one's karma and afflictive emotions. So it is possible that one holds on to an afflictive emotion or considers an afflictive emotion as being permanent, thinking, I'm angry at this person now and I will still be angry at this person in the future, and the anger is never going to change, this aversion is never going to change because he's just bad and I really don't like him. Or looking at the attachment to one's friends or family, partners, then one might think, oh, I will do good for them now, and I have always done good for them in the past, and I will always do good for them because they're my family and friends. So I'm always going to do good things for them, good actions, and so hold to a permanence of those actions too. So this describes how one can have an eternalistic view to karma and afflictive emotions. And then what about the nihilistic views? That also applies to karma and afflictive emotions, which is describing the truth of origin, because one might think that there are no karma and afflictive emotions. They just don't exist. That there is no such thing. That there's also no objects at all to develop that to like and then develop attachment towards, and that and so on. So it is possible to develop those kinds of thought if just nihilism, complete non-belief in karma and afflictive emotions, the truth of origin. So, and that is also present. And then of course, also when one acts upon karma, one's afflictive emotions, one might think that this and engages in karmic actions, one might think that this leads one to liberation. I can attain liberation based on karmic actions and my afflictive emotions. This is also possible, right? And that would be then the third of these discards, grasping to discipline and ritual as paramount. There are many instances in which people think that killing a sentient being and offering the blood would lead them to liberation, or just following different instructions and following their inclinations based on afflictive emotions and so forth, and that, or following certain instructions with regard to afflictive emotions and then engaging in karmic actions based on that would lead them to liberation. That is all possible when we just consider karma and afflictive emotions as the truth of origin. So all three discards are present there too.
So that the darang lates devajin shuaina and around so rangi da pombonga de la ani tado tawadang sulum de chosen dan da de dum de tajerwa taje da dawa tiang da sozoji pombonga nangne jang to nyomong le da nyomong de la so sho zeboina nyomong gi ondo samda dangwaina tes nyomong bosam dang de sara nyomong bose du semjung gi chaden zo yimba zo yage kangla ma sem da semjung chinzo semjung gi da sorwa yiden zo inare kundi nyomong bata mangbo jile bingu doa 딘조 제대 아니 다 서로 대도 단임 나서 봐 차신 다 공도 된지 주바단 나오지 니 제법 가이 냐바지 로빈레 대바텔라 근데 다다라 차서 아니 나 루이데 요새 내링 사람인데 메세들라 내링 사람인데 야나 겨왕감지 나서 봐 여행들라 예 나라라 인 서로 영모보다 대도 영 나라 인념 등이 있나 가르쳐서 딱 벌다 와셔서 와 다 치소나 요 말에 겨왕아마 요 말에 되는 된소는 쳐버다 누구도 와 근데 다 서로 대도 되라 현 서로 대도 돼 답이나 신내로지 좀 anything in the out 좀 서로 질레 서로 냠낭 담들 되라 현 디현자 칼라 도소나 은가 tar부터 그래 은가 라이고 부터 그래 되는 냠바지 현바지 쇼용 거는데 남당바 인 냠바튼 도긴 돼디 다 줄름도 주셔도 잡고 그래 대한다 통람게 방자로 와내서 상마 공중이 어디 내절을 되래
So just to summarize again, how this is applicable, how these three discords are applicable to the truth of origin is that first of all we have the view of the self based on the transitory collections, so the grasping to the transitory collections, the aggregates. That is possible if there are if there is an identification with the aggregates, and then also how can we have eternalistic and nihilistic views and the grasping to discipline and ritual to be paramount in relationship to the truth of origin. If we just take, so the truth of origin constitutes of karma and afflictive emotions, and if we even just look at afflictive emotions, then those are actually mental states, right? And we found them in the list of the different mental states, virtuous, non-virtuous, disturbing emotions, secondary disturbing emotions, those that apply to everything, the variables, and so on. And those root disturbing emotions, they arise based on the different sensations, whether something is pleasurable, painful, or neutral. And so identifying with the self of the aggregates leads to an identification with the disturbing emotions too. And so therefore the grasping to the transitory collections, the view of the transitory collections is can be seen in relationship to the truth of origin. And then thinking about different distances and time spans to think that a particular feeling and of reaction to that, the disturbing emotions would be permanently there over time, for example, would be an eternalistic view to think that there are no previous and later rebirths whatsoever, so that everything stops. That would be a nihilistic view with regard to this. With also that meaning that disturbing emotions would just cease. That is the nihilistic view that can be developed. And then with regard to the holding as paramount, when one thinks that meditating upon the sensations and the disturbing emotions that arise from the pleasurable, painful, neutral sensations, that meditating upon those and grasping to a particular disturbing emotion and meditating upon that would lead one to liberation, to more enhanced states and so on, then thinking that this would be the authentic practice, the authentic path, that would then also be one of those discards that we can find in the path of seeing, but then also applicable likewise, like when it's the meditative concentration, the meditative absorption in one of the afflictive emotions as the path, then that could also be applicable to the truth of origin.
So then da gongba del tang so gongba kharang del pangja ne kan yu mare de tang gogbe ngogal do gibe pangja de se go re nang go se de na me ba cha bam chalu cha de re ta gogba de la ni yang ta na shin sun se ro ni ta da dang ne ta che do da wa sulum do shi sho sun bo de yue re la bu re shen ba dun de yo ba shir sha che ne gogba la ta do ta wa kan de yong ge yue re san la yong de ta zo kāpāla sōsō xīnē rā tōs kōm, sōsō nyamne rā tōs chīne pāngchā tēs mē bā chā sō na, o ngē lām yāng tā bō dhūpa rē, ngā dēw dī tōp sōng, ngā thārbā dī tōp sōng sōng zimbā chī shū yung rō wā. O tī gōbi ngō mē gōpa mā tōpa rē, nā kō tāk zin chī shū sō wā, gōpa mā yīmbā lā yīmbā chī, tī pāngchā tā tā chā sō wā. Ani tā tī kāchī o, tā 딱 버다와 양 다른 게 로투부여래 딱지도 더 다디 타르도긴 저거래 바다 미드는 데랑 균장해래 바데는 아 단에 손대는 다르바 톱송스 딱 봐요 딱 버다와 레기로와 한 가진 데다고 뭐바데라 한 가서 그래 여 말에 주말에 라서 별로 녀버지 제버다와 요나인다 양 가시 데다고 루고바데 겨워지그래 니래 겨워 된 버도여래 되는잖아 여 말에 녀버지 로다오다 되는지 용거여래 tenzo tedi chebar tawa cha rogo yore. Ani tab sulrim du shokzun de ta ten di konzo jodan cheba chi yang shang suwa. Tenze kokwa di lam drum ne, di ro nyomong chungsa chungsa pang ne, ani kasa koran, ryo topyo di lam chung koran, di lam yang taba re, di tarbi lam chukdo yorba re san, tagarang yang taba sung nang rogo ban roga ina, ta sulrim du shokzun cha rogo yore. Cha zang tenzo sumja. And gobi ngogal to jurbe and pangja yimbadi and tezum bindu sumire.
So the truth of cessation then needs to be looked at in a little bit a different way. There we do not identify the discard directly with the truth, but more in light of the opposing factor. So the direct opposition to the achievement of that realization of the truth of cessation, or the direct opposition to cessation. So when we talk about cessation, then this means that something is gone, or one is free of something, right? That means cessation, that something is not existent, or one is free of something. And with regard to cessation, we again need to look particularly at these 3 discards, because they are the ones in question. The other 7 are just accepted broadly that they apply to all 4 noble truths. So again, we need to think about whether or not and how the view of self, extreme views, and the holding to discipline and ritual to be paramount are applicable to the truth of cessation. And one instance, for example, is that when one just practices a little bit of shamatha, a little bit of calm abiding meditation, has some little experience and some little progress in the practice, to then think, oh, I'm practicing the authentic path and it bears fruit. I've attained, I've already completed or achieved the result of the practice. When one grasps like that, that is actually one identifies with the I that has accomplished that practice, and so that's kind of grasping opposes the actual achievement of cessation then. And so it is possible as an opposing factor to grasp to the self here. That is the opposing factor to the achievement of cessation. Then when we think about the eternalistic views again, and the nihilistic ones, the eternalistic view would be to think that one has achieved the ultimate result and that one will just continue like that forever, that this is to be continued forever just in this way, while it is not. So one grasps to the permanence of that practice and that result. Thinking it's the ultimate while it's not. And then to completely negate the possibility of true liberation, true cessation would be the nihilistic view. So to say, okay, this does not go on, like the achieved cessation does not go on, or the development of realization does not continue over lifetimes. So to negate that here is then the nihilistic view. So 좀 좋습니다. 그냥 가르쳐 봐요.
좀 좋던데 나는 그냥 신의 검사 최체 비갑라 대화당 살와당 되는 미도가 냠래 병으로 와. 대 냠래다 람양 다바래 딜신 딜차 디마다 남로서 샤마 민두 다른 거는 양도 버래 선딜 zemba 주주는 것도 와. 어디래서
And with regard to the grasping, with regard to holding discipline or ritual to be paramount, we can also see that if someone practices shamatha meditation, for example, and has some meditative experiences, like bliss or some clarity, if that person then grasps to that as the only authentic path, that is the only thing to be done without moving on, that then can be also identified as this grasping to a discipline or ritual to be paramount.
근데 배제 줄름도 조선들라 그런 때 태좀 랩스서와 간선다 태좀 랩그래 되나다 대살 메도 번냠시에 된 데우톤에 계시셔래 그 섬된 된조당 아줄 미개와 초던서 빵와라 때네 데우데는 가르토 병그래 대화당 살로 메도 번냠게 연구로와 지도공 고바나 차서와 그런 이미전 좀 빵저들 매버창네 레베차티 레부도아 아니 와타 텔라셴바데 하는 고바제니 줄름도 유초센선 다다차도 그래 나서
It is still possible that we have a few doubts with regard to this, to the way that these three discards apply to the truth of cessation. But we mainly need to consider that the truth of cessation is actually the result. And so it is that which is to be achieved when the non-virtue and opposing factors have been completely abandoned on the path. So because it is the result, then the absent, like the opposing factors, are the direct oppositions that prevent this result. And so when we think about cessation too, it is possible that, or these opposing factors, like the view of a self, the eternalistic and nihilistic views, and the holding discipline and ritual as paramount, all of these apply also, since they can be a mistaken understanding that prevents the authentic cessation to arise.
Also, dine ta lam de la to bare. Nam den de la ngomba zoju lola ke tamba yosik ra sulum to chosen de yoba shirjare. En mi se ma juna en de do. Ta do da wa dang ta su de da de ne ngomba zoju lola sanu ta na mere la bu ro. Ta kundu ji lola de yang yore se yore. Tiang da tenji goba den go sona kang ngang sam jin do cha bu do wa. Goba den de yur je chana ke je shere tanda lam di gyugyur je chana ke je she go yore. Ta lam kangso chö dhubi kabla inara nyamling chibi kabla inara ta su chubda da tunbi nyamzo langja da tawa da gomba choba mungba yoyo karwa di ta choba bo nyamzo langba bo da nga yin di nyamling di samje nga le tate ba me ta kang la dang lu dang zo na cheba bo yu sui sha bo ran di nyamling di ngo rang yin di ta chenpo yu ngo yin di nga rang yin nyamba ji lo je yong se kirwa dende di yoba yin du ta tu da wo yo se kiri
라당 루 게 수장회 냠냠
kaji lai sore, kaji lu sore, kaji wangchu ki sore sikirwa. Di ngone da kansa ki taadang, kansa ki taadang da kasa kunda ki taadang jawa chomba je sha rudwa. Ani lenje ki taala samlo taana, dine ngarang pumanga ki rangshi, ngarang rangi nyamne chi ngarang ra yin zimba je yorwa. Ho tenzo tre di yoba yindu sana kare chakre, ta lam 가서라 람 다 냠서 랑켄데 nga yin nyamba indu lam dang nam gi yin yobo de chig du chun den rogo yodu kanso yi ta du zamba sana mendo yana 가서라 hi de lam den de la na ta du da wa ye se ge jare yana lam den se do sana do thobe gi gyu de la borwa do thobun gyu di narang la 당분에 여래 땡로와 규디 타르바토베 규디 나인라 그러와 땅가 타르바토베 규 나를 메서는 가 타르바 가내진 토고 그래 디디 가르선 탈하러 와서 리초 담지 지랑신로 와서 닝가 여상 나타 라이 몰라 운도 규르예 닝가라라 인 선탱이 여상 아니 당도도 여바래서 당도 디지 쉬는 야사네
So if we now move on to the truth of the path, that needs to be understood or realized here, then actually here we speak about the two discards only, right? Because in the Abhidhamma Kosha, it was accepted that 8 discards are to be discarded when seeing the truth of the path. So the only 2 that are in question, because the Samujaya says all 10 discards are present for each of the Four Noble Truths, there are only 2 now left to discuss. Whether the grasping to a self, so the view of the transitory collections, or the eternalistic and nihilistic views, so the extreme views, whether these 2 are applicable to the truth of the path as well. The grasping to the holding the discipline and ritual to be paramount was already accepted by the Kosha also as a discard when seeing the truth of the path. So we only have 2 left to discuss. And generally, this is now in the same way as we have seen it with the other truths. Specifically, here we speak about the cause again. The cessation was the result. And just as the cessation is the result, the truth of the path is describing the cause. And this is the path that leads to cessation. If someone, and there are a lot of different practices, a lot of different things to engage in, a lot of different behaviors that are part of this path. And if one then thinks that, oh, I am the one who performs these actions, I am the one who does these kinds of things, then this, as we have seen before, without a difference to that, applies to the grasping to the transitory collection, so grasping to the existence of a view of a self. And there are different ways that might play out. So as the imputed view of the self, there might be the idea that gods or deities, creator God, and different beings have created me, and so on that basis I perform the actions that they prescribe. Or the more core emergent aspect of the grasping to the self, just grasping to the five aggregates as being me, and then taking that existent self as the basis for any kind of practice. So in any case, this mistaken idea that there's the self, and that there is the self, and the self is necessary to practice the path, to take the path as one's practice, then is a grasping to self in relation to the path. So I am the practitioner, I am the one who practices the path. That in itself is already the grasping to self. So in that case, actually, one thinks that I am the cause for liberation, right? So the path is the cause, liberation or cessation is the result, and here then I am, and the I, the self, is the cause based on which then cessation can be reached. Without me, there's no one to, without a self, there's no one to attain liberation, and so therefore it's my nature that the I constitutes a cause for the achievement of liberation. So that's the kind of grasping to self with regard to the truth of the path.
Nosotine da lamla tachi to tawa de ne samnada mera do lamla da ne tachi to tawa de yang ni tongmang ji mogal do jurba yore sigire gaizana da kashi ji lam ji ngo de yene yoba yene kon yimba di kasure 수치게 배다 얘는 하당 하이 쇠셔 버려서 하서 저는 얘는 요요가로 와서 근데 람들 하이랑 힘으로 와서 어디네 인디 다 본다 예자다다 차고도 와 근데 다다 차고 유도는 된대지 요 말해서 근데 다 버다 와지 용거래 양 가지지 남석인데 줍소나 타르바 탐지기만 고마 토브서근데 요거라 요 말해서 딘내감 내가로 선호다 이제 유래 탐지래서 tar kiawa ngaji se sekende kono rumena nam kawa yure wa di de ne chabar da wa cha ro do wa denzo ni ja de ni lamden ji de ka zo ngo ga do gi ta ji gi da wa de re de yure de yang yure se yure je du ta pa ba tong me la so ba te ba chim lu ji gang san nam da kare she ro yure se de za na den ba xie ja la ni tong lam gi ngo ga do gi bang ja yue 정말 군다게 차 인자 현재 중서 방에다 요래데 조 군다게 차 방에로 와 통남 갑소 네 lenje je chadi ta komnam khona je bangje yinsam de she nangro o de ne indi sama yo kare ta mi ba no je komal samna dana donna dire nyende tema no sonjo de nyende khorang de rang lo she dan chire ma do ba mo ba ne zul do ma de te ba chembo je she dan de yins ani donna da na je yin khorang ji komang ngo de yins ye de donna de shin yin no tse de je le do wa mi ba khorang ji komang ngo ma de yin song ge re na so.
So, and then we just need to see how the eternalistic and nihilistic views apply to the truth of the path. And that is also to be seen as that which is the direct opposition to the truth, to the path of seeing. So that which prevents the path of seeing, right? That which presents the observance of the truth of the path, the meaning of the truth of the path. So eternalistic views would be, for example, so eternalistic views about the truth of the path, misinterpretation of the truth of the path would be to think that the path is actually something that is made, prescribed by a deity, by a god, and or be of the nature of that god or deity. If it was created by a creator or by a god, then it's always there like that. It's a permanent creation. And therefore, one might think it exists permanently as a thing. That would be an eternalistic idea about the path, the truth of the path. And nihilistic would be to think, okay, it's not established at all, it doesn't exist at all, there's no accomplishment of the path, there are some temporary changes that might happen, but since there are no previous or future lives, there's no point in engaging in the path, and there is no true path towards liberation. That would be the nihilistic idea about the path. That then constitute the discard on the path of seeing when perceiving the truth of the path. And so, as we have seen now, and this follows the tradition of the Mahayana, of the masters of the past of the Mahayana, like Asanga, for example, describing that in the Abhidhamma Samujaya, describing that all 10 discards of 5 views and 5 non-views apply to all of the Four Noble Truths. So specifically, of course, the imputed aspects of these discards, they are what need to be abandoned on the path of seeing. They are what are gotten rid of on the path of seeing. Or when the path of seeing is attained, then these are abandoned. There are some minor aspects of the co-emergent afflictions, co-emergent obscurations too, but particularly here for the path of seeing, it speaks about the imputed obscurations, right? The imputed discards. The co-emergent ones are then that which is abandoned on the path of cultivation. And so that's why, so based on the reasons that we have seen now, all the 10 disturbing root afflictive emotions are discards in relation to each of the Four Noble Truths according to the Abhidhamma Samujaya. And Mipam Rinpoche says here that is also how it is in actual fact. So Mipam Rinpoche here says, like, yes, that's actually how things are. This makes sense. What Asanga says, that these apply to all. The presentation that we have seen from the Kosha is a provisional explanation, but this that all 10 relate to all four truths is how things really are.
Also, 드림가서 내 삼장이
Okay, so let's stop here. I would like to stop here for today.
와당시는 되기로 하라.
Let us, and we can now recite the dedication.
소남데 담제 세바니 톰네 녜베 자나 밤제 옌가 나제 발람 조바이 세베 졸레 조와 졸와라주 장조 셈조 레본제 마제 바남 제주르치 제바 냠바 메바양 공내 공도 벨와라쇼 라소 하나 삼마고 조도잖아 된다잖아요.
Okay, so please all take good care of yourselves and see you next week. Lasso Kimbola. Okay, I hope you all have a wonderful week. And first week is already done. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, so fast.
See you. Don't forget that we have the first quiz on Monday, so please review everything thoroughly.
Okay.
Good weekend.